morning. My name is Priyantha Jayavikrama. Bill tells me that you see that name on your agenda. In West Texas, that name is pronounced a little differently. And all those letters after the third letter is silent. So I'm just Jay. I'm the director of TechMart. I want to tell you a little bit about TechMart. This is a research center that's established within Texas Tech. It's a center that TXDOT helped establish about 5 years ago. And I have to say, this is a very special location for us. Bill tells me that there are about 100 people in attendance here, and this is the first time that many people from our sponsoring agency has been here on campus for an event like this. And I think Bill deserves a lot of credit for making it happen. With that, I want to welcome you all and hope you have a very productive day at this seminar. Thank you.
My name is Randy Hopman. I'm the district engineer here in Lubbock, and I want to welcome you to Lubbock. And we're really excited to have this training opportunity here on the campus of Texas Tech this morning, and I hope you enjoy your stay today. I've been involved in the department's research program for about 10 or 12 years, and it's every now and then something very nice happens in the department's research program, and a product is developed or some training is developed like you're going to go through today that is very, very beneficial. Here in the Lubbock district, we're really looking strong at good pavement edge practices. If you have good pavement edge practices, then you have good roadway maintenance strategy. And where we haven't practiced good pavement edge maintenance, the entire roadway surface seems to really have a tough time. And so we're going to be really emphasizing this part of our program and trying to bring good pavement edge practices back into our normal maintenance routine. Thanks to Texas Tech for putting this training together for us and offering this wonderful facility, and for being a partner with TXDOT in our research program and helping us do a better job at our core functions. So with that, I'll conclude my remarks and introduce Tracy Cumby from the Lubbock District Maintenance Section. Tracy.
Thank you, Randy. Just a little bit of background on this particular project. I don't want to take a lot of time because Bill really has the stuff that I want you to hear. But I was in Hockley County. They're the 5th largest oil producing county in Texas, and so I was fighting oil field traffic constantly. And let me just share with you, this is the actual part of the presentation I made to RMC1, the committee members, and to try and get them to buy. I had to go for shock value because they wouldn't take this at face value. So let me show you what I came up with on that. The first thing, this is something that's not foreign to anybody. This is the typical type of edge drop-off that we have all over on our low-volume farm roads, those narrow farm roads. And the thing about this particular road is it was a road that we were out there constantly pulling dirt back up to the shoulders and doing what we could to patch them up and stabilize them. In this particular case, this section right here where the edge is kind of dropped off about 1.5 inches, 2 inches, we'd been out there less than a month prior to this pulling up. And when you've got, like everybody has, hundreds of lane miles of highway to maintain, you can't be out there every day. But I had about a 100-foot section, it was just right at 100 feet, that right next to a lease road where there was a lot of oil field traffic coming in and out and riding on that edge. And for about 100 foot there, they had beat that edge back down into this condition. And that was the result of that 100-foot section. That was a hot oil truck. You know, they're big, round, or not round, they're big and square, and they don't roll very well. They just kind of bounce, and that one went end over end several times and left the driver right in the middle of the road. Amazingly, the driver was sitting in the middle of the road, and he got up and walked to the ambulance, and they took him in to check him out, and last I heard he was okay. I got to thinking about how much effort we put into edge repair but it just doesn't seem like we get anywhere. We're right back out there no matter how much we put into it, how good of a job we do. When we're on narrow farm roads with the kind of traffic we're dealing with, we're right back out there. And I was kind of the point where there's got to be a better way to do this. And what are the best practices? Why don't we go around the state and find out what everybody's doing, and not only state, why don't we go around the country, and why don't we go do a literature review on other projects that have been done, other studies that have been done about edge problems, and try and pool all that information and come together with some recommendations about material and about methods and about equipment, and come up with a better way to patch edges. And that's kind of where I landed with when I put this problem statement together. I've been involved with several research projects, and this has been my favorite. I think that you're going to enjoy I don't think you're going to be bored today. I think you're going to enjoy what you hear. I think you'll be able to take some things with you. Probably a lot of things you already know, but I think you'll pick up a few things you can take with you and share with your people back home. And hopefully the end result will be that we'll, at least for the time being, we'll be able to take care of our edges maybe in a manner a little bit better than what we've been doing. So I think that Bill has done a great job with it. I think all the things that we wanted to accomplish in this, we've been able to do. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bill. He's the lead researcher on this project, and I think you're going to enjoy listening to him today. Bill?
Good morning and welcome. I had the opportunity to meet a number of you or to say hi to you, and look forward to visiting with you throughout the day. Thank you, Tracy, for the introduction. Thank you, Randy, for your emphasis and focus on this issue and your letting your view of the importance of it on behalf of the Lubbock District. Thanks, Dr. J, my boss and friend, for your support of me and the support of this research. I'm pleased that you're here. Well, let's get started. Session 1 is the introduction to the research training. And this is as good a place as any to identify who the intended audience is. Here our goal, the goal of Tracy Cumbie, our project director, Ken Bamey, the project coordinator, as well as the RMC1 folks who funded this, was to provide research that would be helpful to you who are the folks that are responsible for implementing maintenance in the Texas Department of Transportation. It's appropriate to say that we began the research. This is a 2-year research project, as Tracy mentioned. We're almost completed with it. The project will end in August of this year. The first year was data gathering. And as we gathered the data on best practices for pavement edge maintenance throughout the state, these sessions were the ideas that came about as this would be the way to present the material that we learned. And so there's the introduction and then the identification of pavement edge drop-offs. These two topics provide necessary background for identifying the practices that will be talked about the remainder of the day. So I'll just go ahead and put those up there. Edge maintenance practices and procedures, road widening, edge maintenance equipment, edge maintenance planning tools, a specification, and then of course lifelong learning, resources for information. And so these are the objectives of the research for today. The first one is to be able to define drop-offs using TXDOT level of service criteria. Secondly, recognizing pavement edge conditions. This is the old, you got to be able to know them when you see them. And perhaps you might say, well, hey, I know all about that. But you may have some new people who come along and you need to be able to explain that to them. And hopefully you'll get some clear ideas about how you can communicate. These are the typical things to look for. So this is an important part. If it's helpful to you, that's great. But I'm sure it'll be helpful for the new folks that come along that you'll be using this for. Distinguish among, select, and apply edge maintenance and repair practices and procedures. I've never worked as a frame carpenter, but I know a few, and those guys walk around with a tool belt, and they've got a big hammer in it. They've got maybe it's their pliers, and they've got levels, and they've got all kinds of things, tools in their tool belt. And that's what we're talking about here, the tools that you would have in your tool belt dealing with pavement edges. This is what I'm going to present in this portion of the research. Identify and deal with different types of edge maintenance equipment. Getting right on into tools, you can see how that would apply. Edge maintenance planning tools. As Tracy mentioned, TXDOT spends a tremendous amount of money, much more than the 10-point-something million that he mentioned on pavement edges. It's appropriate to do some planning to spend that money in a good way as stewards of state and state property. We'll discuss a draft specification, the idea being that you may wish to contract out work like this or think about it, and so we'll spend some time on that. And then finally, again, go to lifelong learning. Now, having identified these objectives, this is an appropriate time to introduce some commentary from the director of your TXDOT Maintenance Division, Mr. Zane Webb. I have a brief 2-minute film, which I'll show you here in just a moment. Zane's comments make it clear that this research on best practices for pavement edge maintenance is directly aligned with the policy and emphasis of the TXDOT maintenance division, the highest levels. And so with that, let me roll Zane's tape.
The maintenance division is proud of the quality work they see from the TXDOT maintenance staff throughout the state. Everyone works hard, and we appreciate their efforts. You know, quality is not about us working harder. In fact, it's really just the opposite. It's about working smarter and efficiently. Maintenance accounts for 60% of TXDOT's budget. With this large of a percentage of the budget, TXDOT looks to all employees to continually look for efficiencies and areas of improvement in their operations. To us at the division level, quality means results. It ultimately means doing the job right, being accountable. We pretty much leave it up to the individual maintenance sections on how to do the job. Sure, we're concerned about the final product, but how you do it is your decision. We encourage you to share the successful ideas with each other and help us keep up the quality of service that we provide the people of Texas.
Okay. Zane's comments. It's kind of an occupational hazard. I spend a lot of time traveling, a whole lot of time traveling, perhaps too much time I find sometimes. But the point is I spend a lot of time on airplanes, and if you do that a lot, you'll maybe become familiar with Spirit magazine from Southwest Airlines. That's where I spend a lot of time flying. And I've become intrigued with, on the very back of the magazine, there's a feature. It's called Just the Facts, and it talks about different kinds of things. And the way that it works is they give you a picture and they give you a number, and you're supposed to make a connection, a mental connection between the picture and the number. And so that's what I've done here. And from time to time throughout the day, I'll give you some of these, and you know, we'll just see how it works. And so I want you to be thinking about this when I do it. So here you have a picture and a number, and the idea is, well, what's that mean? So can y'all help me with that? What are we talking about here? 25 in the state of Texas. 25 districts in Texas. Well, that's correct, but there's actually a little more to it than that. Not only are there 25 districts in Texas, but this represents the number of districts that we visited in the state of Texas, all 25. I've been to all 25 districts, many of them twice. We typically spend a full day in each district. And I should also mention that we learned something new in each one. Tracy had talked about he didn't know if we were going to learn anything about pavement edge maintenance. Well, I got to tell you, that was really heavily on my mind when I set up this program. And I'm thinking, well, you know, after the first 2 or 3, it'll slow down pretty good. And, you know, after 4 or 5, that'll be about it. But we learned something new in all 25 districts. So you get the idea, a picture and a number. Let's do it. Well, here's one, a picture and a number. It's happened to be the folks from Amarillo in this photograph. That represents the combined years of the experience of the TXDOT personnel who participated in this research effort. Now, of course, obviously there are a lot more people in TXDOT and many more years of experience than that, but this is the combined experience of the people who helped us with the research. And so the findings that I present to you, as much as I'd like to say I take credit for them, I've just been, had the privilege to get to meet so many fine people across the state. Now, like typical researchers, Dr. Hossein and I began the research with a questionnaire. The questionnaire had 57 questions on it, and then there were 2 follow-on questionnaires which had a lot of sub-questions for a total of 154 questions, and then a few more besides that. Now, I'm not sure, because I think perhaps Dr. Hossein and I were the only ones who read all those questions. It did not take long for us to decide that we needed to keep the number of questions down to a manageable number. You guessed it, 3. Okay, this is what we were shooting for. These are the questions. How to define edge drop-offs. We wanted to know how you all did that in the different districts, and that varied actually quite a bit. Also, we wanted to know the typical conditions that existed in your particular district, and that was a fascinating thing. A state as diverse as Texas, you can envision that would vary, and indeed it did. And then, of course, what practices you all implemented, the things that you did, the equipment you used, the way you approached the problem. I also might mention and call your attention to the research report, which I'll show you. It actually comes in 2 volumes. This volume, the thick one, represents the summary of the findings of the 25 districts. Now, I actually have in my office a shelf that's about 3 foot long that contains all of the data we gathered, 3 foot of shelf space like this, 3 feet of that, of data we gathered, which we tried to boil down into this volume. Okay? This is the volume of the research report that summarizes the findings. And then we tried to synthesize that in a summary report which presents the formal research findings from the research data gathering phase. That's this volume. It's a total of about 600 or 700 pages. Now what I did for this research training today is took that information, the 3-foot, which went down to that, and then the information from those 2 volumes, and put it in the form of your workbook. And today we're going to just touch on a number of things that struck me as the highlights of what we learned. And that's what I'm presenting you throughout the day today. Now, of course, we did have some boundaries to our research. We didn't look at everything having to do with pavement edge drop-offs. We looked at some specific things. And specifically, one of the things we did not look at were construction zone edge drop-offs. We realized that there are a number of cases where in a construction project, they'll either mill out a lane and create a drop-off there, or they'll add a lift of hot mix or something and create a lift-off in a construction zone. But we didn't look at that. We specifically did not include that in our research. We focused instead on naturally occurring drop-offs. We focused instead on the drop-offs that would occur due to traffic, due to erosion, due to abusive use, all those kinds of things. Also, we focused on this from a maintenance perspective. When I wrote the research proposal, one of the conversations that I had with Tracy Cumbie was, you know, there's a lot of information out there on pavement edge drop-offs from a number of perspectives, specifically legal issues, construction issues, design issues, things like that. And Tracy said, this is of maintenance, for maintenance, by maintenance. It needs to be maintenance. Also, it's appropriate to identify our emphasis. When we began the research, I felt that we would be looking primarily at low-volume roads without a shoulder. This would be illustrated by the drawing on your left. The drop-offs that would occur, naturally occurring drop-offs on low-volume roads without a shoulder. And of course, to this group in West Texas, that would represent a whole lot of the edge drop-off problem that you have. But as we got into this research, we realized that there are a whole lot of other edge drop-offs that exist out there, naturally occurring, the focus of our research. And so we expanded it to also look at other types of edge drop-offs, looking specifically at highway systems where you would have a shoulder and the kind of things that happen there. We looked at both of these, but our primary focus and a lot of the emphasis of what we found, particularly in the West Texas area, dealt with low-volume roads without a shoulder. So here we have another picture and a number. What could that mean? Well, this research is the fruit of our labor. It's a payday for us. It's the opportunity for us to share what we've learned. And the way that we're doing this is through 7 regional training events, whereas I went to all 25 districts during the data gathering phase. The training phase, the implementation portion, I'm going out to 7 regional groups of districts. Our goal has always been implementation on this project. We've always begun with the end in mind that I'm going to have to talk to and get to talk to a group of maintenance section supervisors, assistant supervisors, crew chiefs, and other folks involved with the maintenance endeavor in the districts and in the maintenance sections to talk with them about best practices for pavement edge maintenance, and that's what I'm here to do today. And of course, a photograph showing all 25 districts, the people who participated in our research. Now that is the end of session 1. And if you're at the end of session 1 in your notebook, you probably will notice there's a pink sheet. And this is a review sheet, and so let's just talk about this for a minute. This is the audience participation time. There are 4 questions on the sheet, so let's just go through those and let's see if we're communicating pretty well. The first question, I always start out with the easy ones first. This is my way. The edge repair research reflects the combined wisdom and experience of maintenance personnel from all 25 districts. True or false? That is true. That's exactly right. All 25. Question 2, true or false? The research is primarily based on detailed statistical analyses of a lengthy questionnaire survey. True or false? That's false. That's exactly right. We didn't litter now. We didn't leave it on the side of the road someplace, but we had to get rid of that survey. We couldn't, that just was not an effective way to gather the data. We didn't do any detailed statistical analyses. We talked to people and we listened to people. That was our function. That was our goal. To talk and to listen, and then now to present to you the results of what we learned. Question 3. Which of the following represents the key perspective? A, maintenance, B, design and construction, C, legal, D, all of the above. I'm seeing a little bit of diversity in the responses I get on that. The answer is A, maintenance. Of course, we looked at all of the above. We looked at all of these, but our focus, the key perspective is maintenance. This is for you. This is specifically for you. And then finally, last question, this edge repair research only deals with low-volume FM roads without shoulders. True or false? That's false. We look at all types of edge drop-offs, not construction zone. Okay, well that's the first session. Session 2 of this research deals with the nature of occurrence of pavement edge drop-offs with a focus on identification. You might recall that we had 3 research questions showing here. This session is quite important because it summarizes the findings from the first 2 research questions. The first 2 dealing with how to define or identify pavement edge drop-offs, and then the typical conditions that exist in the districts. I'm going to cover both of those in this one session. The remaining sessions, sessions 3 through 8, deal with the third question, the best practices we identified in each district. But this is important because it identifies the context for the remainder of the training. I'll basically cover this in 2 parts, first dealing with the identification of edge drop-offs, and then second part dealing with typical occurrences of edge drop-offs in the districts. So here you have a picture and a number. What could that mean? What do we have there? How are edge drop-offs identified in the districts? Well, the most common answer we got was 2. The height of edge drop in inches, typically identified as the threshold for performing edge maintenance. This was the most common answer we got, but it was not at all the only answer, and in fact, we had to sort of continue to question to get people to say this, because this simple definition glosses over some key issues associated with pavement edge maintenance, and let me talk about those. Why is it important for us to think about this idea of how to identify pavement edges for maintenance purposes? Well, when we made our first site visit, we started here in Lubbock. Tracy Cumbie convened the group of maintenance section supervisors in the Lubbock district to visit with us, and he shared with me what I've come to call Tracy's Law. If you lose the edge, you lose the road. If you lose the edge, you lose the road. This is consistent with what Mr. Hopman was saying about the key to successful maintenance for the roads is to start with the pavement edges. If you lose the edge, you lose the road. If you keep the edge, then the rest of the road seems to go okay. That makes a lot of sense. And I've come to believe that this statement, what I call Tracy's Law, provides a context for pavement edges, for pavement edge maintenance. And everything that we'll be talking about, if you think about it in terms of if I can keep that edge together, then I'll be doing well for the rest of my road. That context really is a mindset that I think you'll find very helpful when you get into pavement edge maintenance decisions. It helps you sort some things out and get some priorities clear. So Tracy, glad you're here today. I should have had you say it yourself, but if you lose the edge, you lose the road. Now Tracy never claimed that he was the first person to come up with this. And in fact, many times today I'll share things, and the folks that shared it with me is the person that I attribute it to, but you may know somebody who said it first, and I'm not trying to misquote anybody, but I do want to also give credit to the folks that were kind enough to share information to us. And so let's talk about this question: how do you identify an edge drop-off when you see one? And recall that the most common answer that we got during our research was a 2. Well, what I put up here, though, were the other answers that we got. And usually this was perhaps this was a very common way this was done. We'd ask people, how do you identify pavement edge drop-offs? And instead of giving us a number, like 2, and usually when we pressed, they would give us a number. Y'all would give us a number. But usually y'all would say things like, well, it depends on what kind of road it is. It depends on how wide the lane is. It depends on what kind of traffic. It depends on, is it in a curve or not? It depends on, is this an encroachment into a track? On and on and on and on. A number of factors, a number of those showing here. This is a pretty sophisticated answer to a simple question. All I really wanted to know was how you identify pavement edge drop-offs in this district. I had a chuckle when we were in Dallas and did this. We were meeting with Gary Charlton, maintenance director in Dallas. And he said, well, in our district, we have a special way to do this. We take a rock, and we take that rock and we throw it any direction. And then we walk over and we pick up the rock and we look down there and there's an edge drop-off right there. That's the way we do it in Dallas. And, that was the only place they told us that, but the facts are all we really wanted to know was how you identify them, and when we asked the question, we got a very sophisticated answer. I've come to call this, or think of this as the Jeff Foxworthy approach to identifying pavement edge drop-offs. You might have an edge drop-off requiring maintenance and repair if. Now, y'all know about Jeff Foxworthy. You might be a redneck if. I've got a list of some things here. You might be a redneck if more than one living relative is named for a Southern Civil War general. That apply to any of us here today? Okay. You might be a redneck if the primary color of your car is Bondo. This is one of my favorites. You might be a redneck if your family tree doesn't fork. That sends me. You might be a redneck if you think that beef jerky and moon pies are two of the major food groups. If you had to remove a toothpick for wedding pictures, you might be a redneck. You might be a redneck if directions to your house include turn off the paved road. I like that one. And then kind of one of another of my personal favorites, you might be a redneck if you have a very special cap just for certain occasions that you wear. I like that one. I have a list here of like 165, and they tell me that if you hit on more than 20 of these, that you might need some help. We might need some help. So I'll just keep moving. But what I want to talk about is the Jeff Foxworthy approach to identifying pavement edge drop-offs. You might have an edge drop-off worthy of repair if, and really it falls into two categories. This is what you've told me. The condition that you see out there poses a safety hazard. This is what you all look for. This is a maintenance section way of looking at things. And then the second one is, not only is it a safety hazard, but there's more to it. What if the edge drop-off condition, let's say it's not a safety hazard, but it could cause damage to the road? Well, that's something that you've got to deal with. Both of those criteria represent the thresholds that you're looking at, you all look at, when you say, how is it that I identify pavement edge drop-offs? This is a classic and a fully appropriate way for a maintenance section person to look at pavement edge drop-offs. Is this a safety deal? Is this going to cause damage to the road? If either one of those is true, then I need to put it on my list for repair. That's the way it's done. Of course, there are other ways to do it. For example, written standards. Got a picture, nice edge drop-off there, about 8 inches, and a number 0. What could that mean? Well, actually, there are written standards for pavement edge drop-offs, but this is a typical number of written standards that you all identified when we said, hey, how do you identify? Are there any written standards out there? Actually, it was no, don't think so. One of the reasons that this is important in dealing with pavement edge drop-offs is that there are written standards for dealing with pavement edge drop-offs. And they exist in various places, one of the places being your maintenance manual, TXDOT maintenance manual. And so I've identified here a number 2, 3, and 3, and then a photograph showing an edge drop-off. And the question is, what could that mean? Well, that is the TXDOT level of service definition for pavement edge drop-offs. Desirable, less than 2 inches. Acceptable, less than 3 inches. Tolerable, less than 3 inches. And if you notice after the page in your notes, there's a handout, which is a Xerox of the page from your maintenance manual that presents this set of criteria. It says Section 2, level of service criteria. And on the back of the page, you'll see there's a table in the middle of the page. It says pavement edges. And under roadside maintenance, it says it is desirable to maintain less than a 2-inch drop-off. It is acceptable to maintain less than a 3-inch drop-off. And it is tolerable to maintain less than a 3-inch drop-off. What that tells you is your maintenance manual, which is the way that you've demonstrated or the way that you've stated to the citizens of the state of Texas that you're going to maintain the roads, would tell you that ideally you keep them less than 2. And if they get better than 3, and you've said you're going to do something about it. That's a written standard. Now, the Jeff Foxworthy approach, safety issue or damage to the road, that's a maintenance section supervisor approach. And the facts are that you've got to deal with both. The Jeff Foxworthy approach makes perfect sense from a maintenance section perspective. The written approach is required because it's in your maintenance manual, and so you're legally obligated to do it. And so anytime you end up in a legal deal, like this picture Tracy showed us of the oil field truck turned over on the road, and there's any kind of a question in the court system about, well, was there a problem or not, they're going to pull out this maintenance manual, they're going to pull to this table and say, well, is that greater than 3 inches? And if so, well, guess what? That's not a good thing. And so both of those are required. And this is particularly required. I want to talk about this at various times today, but I just want to plant the seed now that this is an objective of the research is for you all to become familiar with and to know that these are the required standards for pavement edge maintenance per your maintenance manual. There are others, one being the definition that exists in the TextMap program. Let me talk with you briefly about TextMap because some of you may not be fully familiar with it. When I say TextMap, Texas Maintenance Assessment Program, this is a program that was implemented 3 years ago. It just finished the 3rd year of data, 2002, and they're just now gathering data for 2003, which would be the 4th year of data, where the roads for the entire state are rated statistically. What they do is they take all the lane miles you have and they say, we're going to do like 1% or 2%. We're going to look at that many, and they select those in a random way, supposedly representative of your entire district. And they drive those roads and they have a checklist in their lap where they make notes about this section of road. They drive about a mile section, then they go down and pick another mile section. And the items on this checklist are things like this. They look at the pavement, rutting, cracking, failures, ride, edges, shoulders, that sort of thing. They look at traffic operations, RPMs, large signs, small signs, striping, attenuators, lineators. They look at the roadside, vegetation, litter, sweeping, all that sort of stuff. And they group all those together and come up with a score, and they rate the way your roads are. And this allows the people that look at these data to compare how y'all are doing in one district with another district. It's a rating thing. And one of the things they rate, the purpose of me saying this, is one of the things that are rated in TXMAP are pavement edges. And in TXMAP, a fair rating, goes from very bad, or very poor, poor, fair, good, very good. A fair rating is nothing more than 2 inches for more than 50 feet long. That's another written definition for pavement edge drop-offs that you might want to be aware of. And I'll come back and talk about that more later, but I want to introduce it at this point. One of the things that I want to emphasize now, why this is so important, has to do with this thing called scrubbing, the scrubbing effect. What is scrubbing? Why is this issue of scrubbing, why are pavement edge drop-offs a concern? Well, let's think about the way this works. And Tracy's picture of a truck was very instructive when we started this. If you were driving along the road and you happen to be on a section of road where it's a 100-foot section or whatever, and there is a drop-off there on the side of the road, and you're driving along, and for whatever reason, you're looking over here at some cows, or you see a buck, deer, or whatever it is that captures your attention, and you get off to the side, and your wheel drops off the edge, and there's a drop-off there. Well, okay, drops off. Well, hopefully, being an experienced driver, you wouldn't try to just jerk it back on. You'd just drive along with it for a little bit. But then you would try to steer back up onto the pavement surface, to mount the pavement surface. And when you do that, what's going to happen is the right front wheel of your vehicle, with the one that's fallen off, it's going to encounter that pavement edge. And so you've got a flat surface of the tire hit up against, square up, flat up against the pavement edge. And so that's a barrier, and that's going to seek to put force against the tire. It's going to keep you from mounting the pavement. And so you've got to steer into it a little harder. And so you continue to increase your steer input until you get back up on top of the pavement. And what happens, if you think about it, is you're driving along and you're having a barrier to mounting the pavement. Once you put enough steer input into it, that tire in one wheel revolution, one stripe, you go from nothing to on the road. And so the road automatically jerks way over to the left, which is what's shown in this little graphic. That's called scrubbing. This idea of the tire scrubbing against the face of the pavement. That's what scrubbing is. And of course you can see how when the vehicle moves, yaws off far to the left, that if there were a vehicle coming in the opposite direction, well, that would be an accident. Or even if there weren't a vehicle over there, it might be difficult to recover from that and cause a problem. Well, this is a legal issue. Collision could occur, and that's a legal issue. And so this brings back the whole reason of why the level of service criteria are important. This is really what they're getting at. The other thing I want to do to emphasize the importance here is to note that if you look at legal research, this is one of the times I'll mention this, legal research tells us that there is no consensus on the correct pavement height or the allowable pavement height for edge drop-off for a naive driver. But they always say 3 inches, more than 3 inches is a bad thing. So notice what your tolerable level is. 3 inches, got to be less than 3. That's where that came from, is this research. Also, it's desirable to limit the edge drop-off to less than 3 inches. Desirable, less than 2 inches. This is where your level of service criteria came. And it's intended to meet the issue of scrubbing, where a person driving along, motorist, the tire falls off the pavement edge and they get back on, nothing bad will happen. That's the whole idea behind it. That's why. And so from a maintenance perspective, not only must you think about this in Jeff Foxworthy terms, this is a safety issue, damage to the road, but you also have a challenge before you to think about it in terms of the level of service criteria, because that's another obligation that exists in your community in terms of what you do to maintain your pavement edges. It's what your documents say that you'll do, and so it's important to think about it and focus on that. Let me talk a little bit more about TXMAP data, the TXMAP ranking. Go back to our numbers. Now, I said that TXMAP provides a means by which every district in the state can be ranked. And they not only rank them overall, like who's the best in the state, but they rank them in certain areas, and this drawing represents the top rankings for non-interstate assessment of edges. And these are the top 3 in the state. Best of show, El Paso, Odessa, and Childress. Childress is here today. Nicely done. Best of show in the state in terms of pavement edges ranked by TXMAP 2001 data. Now, this brings up a good news, bad news deal, this idea of TXMAP rankings and pavement edges. Good news, bad deals. You know about good news, bad news deals. I suppose there are 1,000 stories that start with, you've got some good news and some bad news. One of these things that I get a chuckle out of, there was this guy, he goes to his doctor for a doctor visit, and he goes see the doctor, and the doctor visits and says, what is it? He's, well, I just don't feel very good, doc. I'm just not able to do the things I've been able to do. He goes, well, let's do some tests, let's do some blood tests, let's check you out. And the guy says, okay. So he submits to all the tests, and the doctor runs all these tests and says, I'll get back with you. Calls the fella in a few days later and says, well, I have the results in, and I have some good news and some bad news. And the fellow's sitting down. He says, well, give me the bad news first. Straight up, don't pull any punches, I need to know. And the doctor says, all right, I'll tell you, it's brain cancer, it's a large tumor, it's gone to your lymph node system, inoperable, there's nothing I can do. You only have a year to live. That's it. Set your affairs in order. And the guy just kind of dies in a pile right there, and he goes, doc, how in the world can you possibly follow that up with good news? And the doc says, well, as it turns out, when we were doing our studying, we also found you have an aggressive case of Alzheimer's, and in 6 months you won't know what's happening to you. So it's a good news, bad news deal. Well, the good news in terms of TXMAP is if you make it to the top half of the rankings in TXMAP overall, this is for all those things I mentioned, the pavement, the edges, the roadside, all that stuff. If you make it to the top half in edges, you might be in the top 3 overall. One of the folks in the top 3, Childress, Odessa, and El Paso, one of the top half is in the edges is in the top half overall. But the bad news is if you make it on the bottom of the list on edges, you are the bottom of the list overall. Let me tell you what I mean by that. Of the bottom 4 districts for edges, 3 of those are the worst on overall ratings for TXMAP in the state. If you made the bottom of the list in edges, you are the bottom of the list overall. Understand what I'm saying? If you lose the edge, you lose the road. That's what that tells you. If you're at the bottom of the list on edges, you're on the bottom of the list overall. That's the bad news. So, if you make it to the top half of the list, you might make it up there in the top 3 overall. But if you make it on the bottom of the list, that's where your problem is. It just straightens it right out. If you lose the edge, you lose the road. Okay. Now, I told you that I was going to discuss this session in 2 parts. And the second part has to do with typical edge drop-off conditions that we identified as we visited throughout the districts. And let's just talk about this as you've got to know them when you see them. So let's just move on and talk about that for a minute. Again, we're focusing on low-volume roads, but not just low-volume roads. We also look at other roads because we were looking at pavement edges in all these cases. And we got some surprises as we traveled throughout the state. There's one right here. You got a picture and a number. What could that mean? 44. Got a picture. What could that mean? Well, 44 is the width. So you think about pavement edge drop-offs and narrow FM roads, and that's a bad thing. But 44 represents the width in feet of the typical roadway with the most severe edge drop-offs that we encountered in the state. Now that is not a narrow road, but that is the roadway that we saw that had the most narrow are the most severe, I'm using the word severe, not the most common, the most severe edge drop-offs. This is your typical poor boy 4-lane. You'll notice the beer can, and I did not empty that beer can and set it there. I just found it laying beside the road. But notice the beer can, that's a 6-inch edge drop-off all along that section of road, 44 feet wide. This was originally a 2-lane highway, 12-foot lanes with 10-foot shoulders. And there was a lot of traffic. People pull over on the shoulder and let people drive past, that sort of thing. And so they said, well, you know, we can fix that. We'll restripe it. So they did a seal coat and restriped it for 4 11-foot lanes, which is what you see here, and produced the most severe edge drop-offs across the state. You show me a poor boy 4-lane, and I'll show you the worst edge drop-offs in your section. That's what I'll tell you. We saw lots of things that affected pavement edge drop-offs. Again, we didn't do any detailed statistical analyses, but the unscientific top 3 were these. This idea of narrow roadway, specifically narrow roadway or without shoulders, and then abusive traffic, and then adverse environment. Now, time won't allow me to go into everything we learned here, but what I'm wanting to point out is that a number of factors cause pavement edge drop-offs. You can see the traffic problem in this photograph. This happened to be in the Laredo district. Classic picture. Also got a guy over here driving on the side of the road like that to let him go by. You can see how that could cause some problems. Well, this isn't just the Laredo thing, though. Here in West Texas, Tracy mentioned oil field traffic. Well, there's also cotton module traffic. You all have seen that. You know, in Central Texas, it was moving homes, mobile homes, wide traffic like that causing problems. In East Texas, it was boat and RV traffic going out to the lake. Also in East Texas, timber haulers. In Dallas and Fort Worth, it was the soccer moms and their SUVs, taking the kids just driving, lots of traffic. It was always something. The problem is consistent. It's just that the cause of the problem in terms of too much, too wide, too fast exists. Traffic is always an issue. Not only, what it amounts to is you have a FM road system that's 50 or 60 years old at this time, designed under the program Get the Farmer Out of the Mud, back at a time when the trucks for farm traffic and those sort of things were a lot smaller and slower than they are today. And the world that we live in today, 50 or 60 years later, is a lot faster. The equipment is larger, heavier, and it just does damage to the roads. That's what it amounts to. And so you have it's kind of a system overload problem, and that's what you're up against, is facing that kind of a challenge of dealing with the system overload problem from a maintenance perspective. A few other numbers. 16, picturing a number, what could that be? Well, that is the width in feet of the narrowest FM road that we encountered in our visit across the state. Now, there might have been some more narrow roads than that, but folks would never show them to us. But that was kind of surprising. Notice this. This was a concrete road. They did all kinds of, there's the concrete surface there. Notice also there's a wheel path right along the edge of that road, nice little drop off, about a 4-inch drop off along that road as we went along, where tires come over. Anytime somebody comes up this hill, coming up the road like this, they've got traffic coming this way, they're going to automatically just pull over, let the wheel drop off, come on up, and it creates an edge drop off. 16-foot narrow roads is a big problem. 21. What could that be? Well, that's the width in feet of the typical FM road, not the most narrow, the typical one. It varied 20, 21, 22, something like that. Those of you who are observant might notice this is not a photograph of a 21-foot wide road. Why is that? Yeah, you've got an edge line. You betcha. You've got an edge line. So this is wider than that. This actually happens to be in the Abilene district. Real nice road that they widened. It was only about 20 feet wide. They widened it about 2 foot on each side and resurfaced it like that and put the new edge striping on there, edge lines and center lines. It looks real good. It worked real well for them. But that was kind of funny. You know, Tracy mentioned that I did a nationwide literature review. And I also not only did that, I called people a sampling, maybe 15 or so of the equivalents of the Zane Webbs of the other states. You know, I'd call and talk to the director of maintenance for the state and ask them what they thought about edge drop-offs. And I was talking about edge stripes. Edge stripes. And the guy said, "You're not from around here, are you, son?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "That's not a stripe, that's a line. You know, this is a line right here." And I said, "Oh, okay, I'll start calling it a line." And so I've been corrected. This idea of edge drop-offs, there are certain places where that shows up more frequently than others. For example, inside horizontal curves, intersections, approaches to hills, etc. I have a few photographs that show those, and I'll just go through those for you right now. And again, I'm thinking that you all might say, well, yeah, I know that. But the idea is that, you know, if this is something that's real familiar to you, then it also might be helpful for you when you go back to your maintenance section and you're talking to the folks that are coming in, new hires or whatever, and you're wanting to train them and share with them. You know, these are things to look for. And I might just say that I would attribute this to a guy named Bill Boatwright. Some of you may know Bill Boatwright. He's in the Laredo District, maintenance section supervisor there. And he's a very observant fellow. He's just a real careful guy, pays a lot of attention. And he was talking to me about how to tell when a buck deer has achieved its full prime in terms of the size and weight of the horns, its spread and all that sort of thing, and how you can tell the difference between, you know, a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old and that sort of thing. He's just a very observant person. And he carries that same level of observation skill over into the idea of identifying typical ways where you identify edge drop-offs. And so some of these things he specifically talked to me about is something to look for. That's what I'm talking about. And of course this one, I'd mentioned that the most severe edge drop-offs were the poor boy 4 lanes, but the most common that we saw across the state were this right here, inside horizontal curve of a narrow FM without a shoulder. I could have taken this. This actually happens to be in Mills County. It could have been anywhere in the state. Probably 3/4 of the district identified this as the most common thing that they saw in their maintenance sections. So this is a problem. Narrow FMs inside of a curve. Another one, and this didn't occur to me at first, but it makes a lot of sense. It's the approach to a vertical curve, and that's what you see here. Notice that you have a narrow FM. This happens to be in Hartley County. ADT 220 vehicles per day. And they've been doing some edging there, but notice that along the side of the road there's a wheel path as you go up the hill. And if you think about it, if you're driving along on a narrow road like this, you don't know what's coming across the other side. And so you'll instinctively pull over because you don't want to, and if there is something, you instinctively want to pull over because you don't want to encounter that on a narrow road like this. And so you'll see, you know, if you go back and you look at anywhere you approach a hill, a vertical hill, you're going to see a propensity, it'll be common for you to have edge drop-offs like this, wheel paths and things right along the side of the road. Very common. That's a 21-foot wide road. This is not a narrow road, but it is a problem. This happens to be in Wise County. And ADT here is 5,200 vehicles per day. This road has 12-foot travel lanes and 5-foot shoulders, and it's got about a 4-inch drop-off here along this area. Real good, strong subbase. Really not rock, but a real stable material. And what happens is when vehicles are driving along and there's a place of business over here and they want to turn left, well, they just stop and wait for the oncoming traffic to get out of the way, and then they make their left turn. And, you know, not being from Lubbock, right, or Lubbock from Amarillo or from Childress or wherever, those folks out in this part of the world, they're impatient. And so instead of just waiting back behind here for the person in front to turn left to get out of the way, they pull over, take one vehicle, you know, one set of tires from the vehicle off the pavement and drive around and pass on the right. Creates a serious edge drop-off problem. In that sense, the shoulder kind of is an attractive nuisance, whereas shoulders are typically a good thing. In this case, the shoulder ends up providing a stable base, so they feel like they can pull over and get away with that, and they do. And it causes its own brand of edge drop-off problems. Illegal in urban and metropolitan areas, this is a problem. People just turn wherever they want because they can. This happened to be in Bexar County, in the interstate highway. Notice the edge drop-off here where people are making illegal turnaround. The district or maintenance section folks had ran post and cable, and they said wherever they stop the post and cable, they get the illegal turnaround. And they run it back a little further, and they get another one. And that just is a continual battle for them. That's not a pretty picture. This is a truck pull-off. Again, this is a service road for an interstate highway. Trucks pull off, check their load, do whatever it is they need to do, just trash the edges. A lot of times this happens underneath bridges. In the high traffic areas, a very common edge drop-off problem. We did no sophisticated statistics, but what I would say in general is that the severity of the edge drop-off is positively correlated with these factors. No shoulders, narrow pavement width, narrow right-of-way, abusive traffic, heavy traffic, the age, subgrade, erodible, precipitation. As you start seeing those factors show up, you start seeing your edge drop-offs get worse. Now, the neat thing about the state of Texas is that in most places, most of these factors don't occur at the same time. And when you really start having serious, awfully bad edge drop-off problems, it's when all of these occur at the same time, because there's nowhere to go with it. Most districts, they're saving graces. Either their soils are good, or the traffic's low, or they've got plenty of right-of-way, or whatever. But some places, and there are a few, where all of these are bad. And those places have some really serious problems. And that's not y'all. Y'all have your own share. But there are some places, believe me, where folks have every one of these. There's a bad, bad deal. And so the severity of the edge drop-off is going to increase as you see these factors exist, both in number and in severity individually. Okay, we are to our pink sheet. And I'm pretty close to on time. We're going to get you a break here in just a second. But before we do, let's go through our pink sheet. What is Tracy's Law? What is Tracy's Law? Question 1. Yeah, exactly. If you lose the edge, you lose the road. Nicely done. Okay, question 2. True or false question. The Jeff Foxworthy Approach to identifying edge drop-offs consists of assessing whether the edge condition poses a safety hazard to the traveling public and whether the condition might result in further damage to the pavement structure. True or false? Exactly. That's the way that the most typical and classic and appropriate way for an edge maintenance person, for a maintenance section employee to look at pavement edges. What is the TXDOT level of service criteria for identifying pavement edge drop-offs? Yeah, desirable, acceptable, and tolerable. Desirable 2 inches or less than 2 inches. Acceptable less than 3 inches. Tolerable less than 3 inches. And let me tell you the way that I remember that. When I was a kid, there used to be a guy on the radio, and his name was Justin Wilson. He's an old Cajun guy. And I'd say, give me some of that there stuff, and he'd use the word DAT instead of that. He'd say DAT, D-A-T. And DAT happens to be the acronym for desirable, acceptable, and tolerable. So you can think of Justin Wilson, and you can think of DAT. When someone asks you what's the level of service criteria, you can say, well, DAT, desirable 2 inches or less than 2 inches, excuse me, acceptable less than 3, tolerable less than 3. And that'll help you remember it. And the reason you have to remember it is this deal of scrubbing introduces a liability issue to the state of Texas if you don't maintain the roads to that level. Question 4, true or false? Scrubbing refers to how the undercarriage of a vehicle drags the pavement surface when the tire goes off into a very deep edge drop-off. Is that true or false? That is false. Scrubbing is where the tire, the inside of the right tire, butts up against the pavement edge drop-off where there is one, and it creates this scrubbing on the inside of that tire, and then when you mount the pavement, that causes the vehicle to scoot over in the other lane. Question 5, true or false? According to 2001 TexMap data, any district can score in the top 3 overall as long as their pavement edges rank in at least the top half of the state. That's true. That was the good news. That's true. Of course, the bad news was what? If you ranked in the bottom of the state in your edges, you are the bottom of the state overall. That was the bad news. So that just tells you Tracy's Law is valid. If you lose the edge, you lose the road. Question 6, which of the following is the most common, underline most common, condition where an edge drop-off will occur? A, approaches to vertical curves of narrow roads without shoulders. B, the inside of horizontal curves without shoulders. C, truck pull-offs beneath bridges on interstate highways. Or D, anywhere along a poor boy four-lane U.S. highway. Which is the most common? Well, actually the answer is B, as in Bill. The inside of horizontal curves of narrow FM roads without shoulders. That's the most common. Now the other two mentioned here, the vertical curves and the truck pull-offs, those are also common, but the most common we saw was the inside of these horizontal curves. And the most serious, the most severe, but not the most common, the most serious was D, the poor boy 4-lane deal. That's the most serious, most severe. You think about the amount of traffic on those poor boy 4 lanes, you can see how that would be a bad thing. Question 7, true or false? According to this research, the key factors which cause pavement edge drop-offs are A, 1, narrow roads without shoulders, 2, abusive traffic, and 3, adverse environmental conditions. Yeah, that's true. That's exactly right. That's the most common things that showed up as we went throughout the state. Okay, now that's the end of Session 2. Session 3 on our schedule, which deals with edge maintenance practices and procedures. Recall our 3 research questions. Boiled down from 157 to 3. We got there. These were the 3 questions. How to define, what they are, typical conditions where they exist, and then of course the best practices. The Session 2 we just dealt with the first 2 questions. This session, Session 3, and the remainder of our time deals with the 3rd question, best practices for pavement edge maintenance. This is what I'll be talking about with you the remainder of our time together. These are the topics that I'm going to cover. Maintenance costs, and then getting into edge maintenance awareness, preventive maintenance, edge repair techniques, and edge repair procedures. And we'll just cover them one at a time. And so let's start out with costs. Now here you have a picture and a number. What could that mean? 270, what is that? I'm not hearing anybody. It's a function code. Yeah, function code for what? Edge repair. That's exactly right. 270 is your function code for edge repair. In fact, according to your data that I got from Joe Graff, y'all spent $11.4 million in 2001, these are the 2001 data, on edge repair, function code 270. But the point of this little exercise is to illustrate that you do much, much more than function code 270. One of my favorite photographs from this, I just like it. I don't even know what it is I like about it, but it is a nice photograph. Notice along the left side there some other numbers. Those are also function codes. What function codes are those? Well, they're common edge repair function codes. When we went to the districts, we heard about 22 different function codes mentioned. When we've asked people about, edge maintenance, what do you do? They say, we do this. Well, what function code do you bill it to? Well, I'll do this. 22 different ones. And these were the best of show right here. Of course, 270 being front and center, that's a no-brainer. But these others were very commonly used. And you can see how some of these make a whole lot of sense for edge repair. Now, some of them include more than just pavement edge repair, too. For example, up the strip seal. Well, y'all don't just do strip seals on the edges, but you do strip seals on the edges. And so maybe that's not all associated with pavement edge maintenance. Fog seal, same deal. What about adding and widening pavement? Well, that's probably edges. Pretty hard to get away from it there. Reshaping unpaved shoulders, that's edges. Chemical control of vegetation control of edges, reshaping ditches. These are all very common, the most common, in fact, that we encountered. So if you look at this, my point is those 7 edge repair function codes, instead of just $11.4 million, that's about $40 million. You say, well, you didn't use $40 million. Yeah, because not all that's edge repair. But a lot of that's edge repair. I even go so far as to say most of it's edge repair. Plus there were 22 different function codes that were identified, and if you add the 22 together, it's $217 million, all of those. Now, y'all didn't spend $217 million on edges, but you sure didn't just spend 11. So maybe you spent 50, maybe you spent 30. The point of this little exercise is to point out that you all spend a lot of money on pavement edge repair, a lot more than just function code 270. That's the purpose of this illustration. So it's a significant part of what you do. It's not just one thing, it's a big part of what you do. And so from this point forward, I want to present to you the best practices for pavement edge maintenance that we identified in our research study. I'll begin with awareness. Now, when I began the research, I did not initially think about this as a best practice for pavement edge maintenance. But when we started looking at all the things that are done in this area, it became clear to us that some of the techniques that you all were involved with were really just awareness things, keeping it in your mind, and really to a large extent keeping it in your mindset and thinking about it from the perspective of this is an activity that's important associated with maintenance in your sections. That's a big deal. So let me talk about some edge maintenance awareness things. One of the first ones we encountered had to deal with the design phase, focusing on edge maintenance details. Focusing on edge maintenance details. Let me draw your attention to this photograph. This is in Rockwall County, Interstate 30. And notice this is a concrete pavement structure, concrete shoulder and travel lanes, and then notice right here on the edge this strip. Well, that's an asphalt wedge. Okay? That's an asphalt wedge. This is an excellent design detail for a high-volume road. The reason it's an excellent design detail for a high-volume road is that the subbase for this pavement doesn't stop at the edge of the shoulder. It comes out to about here. And so you have this zone between the edge of the shoulder and the edge of the subbase where nothing really will grow, and they put in an asphalt wedge where they're not going to have an edge drop-off problem there. This was one of the sections Interstate 30 we looked at. Unfortunately, we also looked at some other sections Interstate 30 that were built after this where the person who did the design didn't think about pavement edges. This is why this is awareness. It's thinking about it. It's thinking about it. And what that person did is rather than put this wedge here, they put nothing. And so they ended up with, instead of a slope from this point, the edge of the shoulder, to the edge of the subbase, they went over straight across and then up vertically about 10 inches or 12 inches or whatever the thickness of that concrete was. And then they said, well, we'll blade soil over in there and we'll try and get something to grow. Well, it just isn't growing out there. It's just not working. And so they have a continual edge maintenance problem on a road that was a brand new road. That's an incredibly frustrating thing for you all to deal with. And it all comes down to introducing the idea of edge maintenance in the awareness phase into the design. And we saw more places than I'd like to mention where there were design details where a new road, basically a rehabilitated road, ended up causing you all maintenance problems from the get-go, when it should have been one that you didn't have to worry about for a long time. That's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about awareness. This is one right here, this section of road, several miles of divided 4-lane road, divided highway. Did an overlay, 2-inch overlay, maybe a 2.5-inch overlay, something like that. Well, beforehand, they were probably within the TXDOT level of service criteria, 2 inches, 3 inches, 3 inches, maybe even an inch, half-inch. Certainly less than 2 inches on the edges, but when you put a 2.5-inch overlay on that, you can see how all of a sudden you're beyond the tolerable level. And so all those edges had to be pulled up. My understanding, if I remember the record, about $1.1 million worth of pulling edges. You've got 4 areas here you have to do it, on this side and then on this other side over here for several miles. And this was all done by maintenance forces. Wasn't in the construction contract. That was a significant amount of effort that was not incorporated in the design phase, which would have been, which would have just created a tremendous maintenance burden, and it did for the folks that had to deal with that. This was kind of an unusual awareness tool, this course, Risk Management to Reduce Tort Liability. The Brownwood District talked with us about this. They send all their maintenance section supervisors to this course. Notice the audience for this course. It's a 3-day course. The description is risk management process taught in this course will help public entities reduce tort liability lawsuits. Well, I'll talk with you about liability here in just a moment, but the audience, engineers and technicians directly responsible for traffic operations, construction, or maintenance operations. Look at there. And the thinking of the folks in Brownwood on this course as an edge maintenance awareness practice is that everything you all do, so you've got a lot of roads you've got to look out for, and you've got a lot of problems you've got to deal with, and so you're always having to make judgment calls on, where do I put my effort, where do I put my emphasis? Because you've got more than you can say grace over is the way we look at it. And so faced with that kind of a decision, how do you make the call? Well, if risk and liability to TXDOT figures into the picture, and it does, this course sensitizes you to the kinds of risks and liabilities that are associated with maintenance operations, one of them being pavement edge drop-offs. And so the Brownwood District, they send all their maintenance section to the folks of this, and they commend that to everybody. They say it was money well spent, that everything that on a daily basis you all do, it deals with this, and they liked it. So I pass it along to you as an idea to think about. I've already talked with you about this liability thing. I want to talk about it just a little bit formally because I was curious about this. One of the things that you hear a lot about is, there is a liability issue, or is there? And I really wanted to know. So I talked with you about scrubbing. Well, what I did was I went to the Texas Attorney General's office, and they have an assistant attorney general in there. His name is Ron Garner. And Mr. Garner is the person in charge of dealing with this kind of issue for the Texas Department of Transportation. And I asked him, I said, what records do you have that deal with pavement edge drop-offs? And he gave me the typical thing, if I told you I'd have to kill you, I said, well, no, don't go there. Well, anyway, he did. He went to look. They don't keep, they keep records, some of which they're willing to share and some of which they can't share because these projects or cases are still open. But of the cases that were closed for the past 10 years, I asked him about it, and he sent me a table, and this is a summary of that table. And I have that information that he sent me in my hands, and let me just go over that with you. He said since 1990, they had tried 35 cases. Now, he wasn't willing to talk with me about cases that he was still dealing with. 13 of those were edge drop-offs in edge drop-off cases. They tried a bunch of other cases, but 35 edge drop-off cases. 13 of them in a construction zone, 10 of them not in a construction zone, and 12 it didn't say one way or the other. The edge drop-off height ranged from 2.1 to 8 inches. Let me just read through a few of these with you. Loose gravel with edge drop-off. Soft shoulder edge drop-off mowing maintenance problem. 4-inch sloped edge. Muddy shoulder. 4-inch sloped edge drop-off. 5-inch sloped edge drop-off. 8-inch edge drop-off open and obvious. 2.1 inch drop off, 3 inch edge drop off, 4 inch sloped edge drop off, 5 inch sloped drop off, 8 inch edge drop off. Yeah, those are the ones where it identified the amount. You can see how this is the deal. You know, these are in the maintenance sections, and of course you would see how most of those numbers I mentioned are beyond the tolerable level for your level of service criteria, and all of them were beyond the desirable level of service criteria. That's the liability. So it is a deal. 13.5 million liability, 1.5 million plus pending cases. How much money y'all spend? That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money spent on lawsuits. Another thing, this is an edge maintenance awareness deal, has to do with the leadership focus. Now, I was so appreciative of Mr. Hopman, the district engineer for the Lubbock district, to come in here and welcome you all on behalf of the Lubbock district for 2 reasons. One is, of course, he's from Lubbock here, and that's appropriate for him to do. But more importantly to that, for this group, if your DE thinks something is important, y'all are going to think that's important. He talks about it, and that's something you're going to think about. If it's something that he emphasizes, then that's something you're going to emphasize. And it's a leadership thing at the operations level, at the district level, and also at the division level. Zane talked about this at the maintenance conference. I was there a few weeks ago in the maintenance conference. I heard him talk about this and his phrase, you know, his little series, the good, the bad, and the ugly. He talked about pavement edge drop-offs and pavement edge maintenance. And then they invited me to speak on this topic at the maintenance conference. I saw some of you there. This is just the awareness from the leadership level. And you know, you all are leaders too. If you're folks in your sections, see you thinking about this and see you working with this, see you considering how you can make it better. If it's on your mind, then you're going to communicate it to them and it'll be on their mind. And it's just the whole awareness thing. I thought this was a pretty neat picture. I don't know if you can make it out back there in the back there, but notice at the top you've got geese. And notice at the bottom you've got fish. And really it just kind of works its way out and the leaders show up. And the idea is the leadership focus, that's the way things are going to go. And I hope that you all find yourself thinking about this from a leadership focused standpoint, influencing the people that you work with and who work with you, work under you on this area of pavement edge maintenance. Moving away from the awareness issue, I want to talk briefly now about some preventive maintenance procedures, preventive edge maintenance. And I want to begin with a film. Now, this film was submitted by the Waco District to Phil Murphy, the Assistant Maintenance Section Supervisor in Bosque County, submitted this film. And it deals with pavement edge maintenance where the edge of the road is broken off. So all the work that you're going to see done is done on the existing base crown. They're not doing anything other than just rebuilding an edge that's broken, but they have a pretty neat way to do it. Let me give you a little background on the road. This is FM 182. Typical width of this road, 18 to 19 feet, because of course some of that, you know, the road base crown was wider and the edges had broken off, and so they just didn't have as much road as they wanted. They wanted to rebuild those, and they had about 7 miles of road which they rebuilt. And the defect was pavement was rutting and pavement edge damage. That's what they were trying to correct, again on the existing base crown. So let me roll that tape for you.
This is what some of our edges are looking like before we fixed them. Just a good drop off and narrowing the road, chewing off the edge of the road. First step here, we healed the dirt away from the edge of the pavement. We're just cutting off the edge of the pavement and edging out the loose stuff about 2.5 inches deep. It makes our hot mix lay a lot better. This is what we're using to heal off up against the curb, edge of the highway, where we're coming back and putting hot mix on it, repairing the edges. But this is about 2.5 inches lower than your grater blade, and it heals it off pretty good, gives you about a 2 to 2.5 inch depth for hot mix going back on your edges. I'll show you in a minute kind of what we're doing. This is what it looks like after we heal it out. get us something to work with to put a reasonable amount of material back in its place. Then we're going to come back and we tack the edges of it, the edge of the road with this is our conveyor boxes that we bought to put on. They sure do work good. Then we come along and we put a windrow. We got our motor grader with a little box like built on one end. It's sitting at an angle, and we just windrow that out to the edge like we want it. If you'll notice, Bobby's doing a good straight job on the edges. And that picks up all these edges. And our maintainer comes along and knocks the road down. Operation, we are cautious about the operator not breaking over the edge of this. It keeps it nice and uniform. Sometimes you have to make a second pass to bring it up as high as it ought to be. That's no problem. And this is what it looks like after we get through, and then the seal coat will come over and cover it all up, and it'll look real good. We're using convoy trailers for our flaggers because we are a pretty fast moving operation. This sure does help these old narrow roads to do stuff like this. And it's a good fast moving operation and does a good job. This is kind of what it looks like after we finished, after we've pulled up the edges. This is FM 203 after we did this previous shot that I had on this film. This is after we done the shoulders and got it restriped and everything. This is what it looks like.
Okay, very good. Now, one of the things that you'll notice in your workbook, of course, obviously I couldn't put a film in your workbook, but what I did was I captured still shots from the different steps. For this film, there are three other films after this one. I captured still shots representing each phase of the repair operation. And let me just click through those with you now. And this will be a record that you'll have for this type of thing, and also the point of contact information, so you have in your notes. And if you something that appeals to you and you think would work for some of your roads, you could call up these folks and talk with them about it. Again, the problem in this case was the rutting and edge damage, and the solution was to rebuild the road on top of the existing base crown. They set up the traffic control using the convoy trailers. Again, they talked about how it was a fast-moving operation. Their first step, really, from the standpoint of that, was to peel back the deteriorated edge with the motor grader. They used this motor grader blade attachment. And they said the main thing that they had to be careful of, you could probably pick up from the film, although actually I muted the sound a little bit. It sounded just awful. like a bunch of people scratching their fingers on a chalkboard, just terribly hard scraping, and that extension will wear away and cut back into your moldboard, and that'd be a bad thing. So that's something you've got to watch. But they've got this attachment. They place the tack coat after they peel that back. Then they place the material in a windrow using their side discharge chute. They were using Type D hot mix on this operation. They knocked that windrow down with a motor grader blade, got the little box attachment on the end, roll it with a smooth drum roller, and then, of course, notice one of the things they had to do after they were done was pull up the edges. Again, if you think about it, doing this kind of an operation will rebuild the pavement edge, but where you might have had within the acceptable limits on an edge drop-off before you were done, after you're done, you're not within acceptable limits anymore, so they would have had to pull up the shoulders along the soil along the edges there, and then, of course, they would have done this associated with the seal coat operation, got a seal coat across it, and then restriped it, and it'll look great just like this. These are the data on this. Every time someone offered to send me a film like this, I'd call them up and ask them some questions and try to summarize the kind of information that you all would have interest in. These are the data on this particular project. Let me just draw your attention to a couple of things. It's a lot of hot mix per day. I've had people comment on that before. This was their price for hot mix. This was their cost per centerline mile for doing what they were doing on this particular application, $7,050 per centerline mile. They seal coated it later and then restriped it, as you saw. Reuben Phelan was the crew chief here, and of course the folks in the Bosque County maintenance section, Jerry Thompson being the maintenance section supervisor there, be the people to call. So give them a call if this is something that you think would be helpful to you for your particular applications where you're losing the edge of the road like they were. You could see how a person who was thinking about pavement edges, if you lose the edge, you lose the road, that would lead them to think about, okay, well here I'm going to go back and I'm going to reclaim some of that edge so I can take care of my road the way I want to take care of it. This is directly related to that. Let's talk about some other preventive edge maintenance techniques. Fog seals, raw edging, sometimes called. This happens to be in the Amarillo district at the Hartley-Moore County line, 220 vehicles per day. The idea behind sealing cracks, raw edging, is to keep the edge of the pavement alive. Many of you here do that. I have a list here, some of the districts who do this sort of thing. Let me just find that. Amarillo, Childress, Laredo, Lubbock, Lufkin, Odessa, Paris, Far, San Angelo, Tyler, Wichita Falls. Those were a few that mentioned it prominently when we talked about things they did. And the thinking is that as your pavement edge cracks, the surface starts to oxidize and starts to wear out, that putting this emulsion or asphalt on the edge will help keep that alive, prevent moisture infiltration, and it just helps keep the edge together. Again, if you keep the edge, you keep the road. That's the idea behind it. Some folks take that a step further and they place some fine graded aggregate on top of that. Could do a strip seal. This is in Hall County on the outskirts of Esteline, about 130 vehicles per day. This is a 21-foot wide road where an edge seal has been done. You can see that. It's obvious in this area along the edge of the road. And one of the things that was mentioned to us, of course, this is certainly a good way to keep the edge together, to take care of the pavement edges. The concern is that if you get too much of a, when you put the aggregate on there, if you get too much buildup on the edge, you might trap some water, and that can cause its own share of problems. But if you're careful about that and are able to do it, then this works very nicely. Commend it to you. This was a solution that was suggested by in the San Angelo district. It's an intersection approach apron. This is a case where you have, it's in Coke County, Ranch Road 2059 at the intersection of State Highway 158. The ADT on this road is 70 vehicles per day, low traffic. And the thinking is that they were having trouble where these two roads came together, this Ranch Road and the State Highway, especially at the area where the road intersected. And so for a distance of 600 to 1,000 feet, they widened the road about 3 foot on each side. You can see that. And they created this approach apron, and then they'll come back and they seal coated it from side to side. And this way, when someone's coming along the state highway and they turn off to this road, they've got a little bit wider space here. They can kind of get lined up, get direction where they kind of get lined up with where they're going, and they're not kind of hugging the edge, that sort of thing. And that just helps things go better. The same is true for folks coming this way. As they get near that edge, they kind of naturally start pulling over to make a turn. In this case, it was a T intersection. And so this was something that they did. They couldn't do it all, but they did some of it. And particularly, they did this part. And they also not only did this in this kind of area, widened a little section of the road, but they have ranch roads that intercept some of their FM roads, and they found that it was helpful to do this there to prevent a recurring maintenance problem. It kept them from having to go back out there again and again and again was the idea. Felt like they were throwing good money after bad, and this selective widening process helped them. As a preventive edge maintenance project, that's what we're talking about. Vegetation, of course, was prominently discussed throughout the state. This is in Wise County. This particular case is a pretty wide road. It has a shoulder, and adjacent to the road there's a large strip of base material that, and they had a drop-off 2 or 3 inches, and they did a test strip where they were adding vegetation. The idea being the vegetation next to the road would buttress this edge and keep it from peeling off. Now this was interesting to me, and I encountered throughout the state, by and large, most everybody we talked with said that they thought vegetation next to the pavement, showing here, was a good thing. Vegetation on the pavement was a bad thing. And so it was always trying to fight that line. But the idea about vegetation being next to the pavement, that was always viewed as a good thing. It helped hold the pavement together, helped hold the edge there. This is kind of interesting to me, particularly being an engineer. The way that I was taught pavement edge design was that next to the road, you didn't have vegetation. You had just a transition zone of nothing like base material or soil or something, but you didn't put vegetation next to the road because of the moisture it might introduce in the pavement structure. But you all are telling me, and this is accepted throughout the state, that vegetation next to the pavement and controlling vegetation next to the pavement is a good thing. And I've come to agree with you, and I've had many people tell me how the maintenance burden associated with these roads has dramatically decreased, where several years ago the standard operating procedure was to blade all this off and have nothing but soil out here, free soil, no grass in it or anything whatsoever. That changed to allowing to establish vegetation where we had rainfall that would support it. And that was a good thing. That really helped a lot. Of course, here is the undesirable vegetation problem. Well, let me just back up here. Undesirable vegetation problem. This happens to be in Hockley County. 850 vehicles per day, and notice that you've got vegetation here that's going to do a good job of buttressing or supporting the edge of this road, but that it's going to try to encroach into the pavement structure, and the idea where y'all do your vegetation control is to keep that back, so y'all do your herbicide program and other things that you use. Delineation, thinking about preventive edge maintenance. Again, consistently throughout the state, the word to us was that delineation helped keep people off the edge. It was like that edge line where you had, first of all, it was a road wide enough with an edge line. That was a step in the right direction right there. But then secondly, when you had the edge line, the typical way that the motorists would behave is they would try to stay within the line. Most of them would. Now, this does not apply to like farmers and folks who are driving, they go wherever they want to because they can, but this with equipment. But folks that are motorists that use the road, in their vehicles, the typical case, the edge line helped real well. We did not see a lot of the use of signage. I paid a lot of attention to this. I tried to notice signage. I've not seen very much of that across the state, and I'll take that as a good thing. Every now and then, this happened to be a construction zone, and the shoulder drop-off signage, this was a road widening project in the FAR district, and the signage is in place because they're in the process of rehabilitating that section of pavement. But by and large, the absence of signage throughout the state, the way it was put to me is, don't put a sign up, fix it. That just makes sense. You don't want to have a situation that you leave long enough that you have to go out and memorialize it with a sign. Instead, just get out there and fix it. And so that was the most common thing that we saw done, was not a lot of signage, but every now and then we'd see one. Speaking of delineation a little further, and I put this in just for fun really, there were some special techniques that we saw used throughout the state. Notice that edge line. That is an edge line. That shines, right? That's a really bright one. This is in the Atlanta district. There's a close-up view of it. This is called, let me get this right, inverted profile pavement marking. There's a special specification that deals with that. And what it amounts to is this marking is textured. You can see these little crimps in it. And so it ends up being something like a rumble strip. It ends up being something like a rumble strip. Well, you know, you have on your divided U.S. highways the rumble strip that'll really wake you up if you're driving along the road. Well, this little 4-inch inverted profile marking will also act as a rumble strip. If you're on a road that's a hot mix surface, so it's smooth, it'll give a real high-pitched whine, a kind of a hee like that. It's very noticeable, the road noise. If you're on a road that's seal-coated like this one, you can tell it's there, but it doesn't really add a lot in terms of the noise. But the thinking was, they had sections of road here. Well, first of all, they have a lot of rainfall out there, so that makes the edge lines harder to see. Also had certain sections of road where the accident rate was viewed as being, or damage rate was viewed as being more problematic. It was more of an issue. And so because this is pretty expensive, they selectively put this in places where it would do them the most good. They had some other unusual things. I never seen anything like this. Maybe y'all have never seen anything like this either. They had a stop sign out there with a solar panel on it and little lights at each corner that flashed. They said they had to keep moving it around so nobody would steal it. They had a RPM. Notice that RPM. That is a special RPM right there. This is, again, is in Atlanta District. It has a LCD switch on top of it with lights here and here, and when it rains, water that falls in this area completes a circuit, and this light starts to flash. When it's dry, it doesn't flash. Isn't that interesting? They do all kinds of strange things, but the idea behind the delineation is that, you know, this is viewed as helpful in terms of pavement edge maintenance. I just put those up there for fun. I thought it was kind of neat. Edge repair techniques. Let's talk about some of the things people do, and hopefully we're getting away from this part of edge repair techniques. You'll see that's kind of the idea. This happens to be in Bexar County. And notice the, I'll call it a broken edge or a fish mouth. The edge of the road is going away and it's encroaching into the travel lane. Well, one of the things that was kind of funny when we traveled around the state is that folks usually would, because they're wanting to show us best practices for pavement edge maintenance, they usually tried to steer us to the best sections of road they had. And every now and then you'd come across a section of road that someone didn't know they had, or they wouldn't have driven you out that way, okay? A couple of researchers with all these cameras, you know, we jump out and we start taking pictures of everything. And this was one of those cases. And so when it showed up, the director of maintenance happened to be in the vehicle with us along with the maintenance section supervisor, and the director of maintenance popped off and said, well, this reminds me of the Raymond Stotzer dictum. Y'all know about the Raymond Stotzer dictum? Y'all remember that? Y'all ever hear that? The sun will not go down on a pothole in Texas. Y'all ever hear that before? That came from one of your former executive directors, Raymond Stotzer. The sun will not go down on a pothole in Texas. And so having said that, the director of maintenance turned to the maintenance section supervisor and said, well, you know, get it on. You know, we need to get somebody out there and get that fixed because we don't want the sun to go down on a pothole in Texas. To which the maintenance section supervisor, who was incredibly quick, said, that's not a pothole, that's edge repair. He was pretty quick. But the point is that, you know, just bucket patch, simple kind of repair, that's one of the things that are done, but a lot of other things are done too. And I have another film that I want to show you. This came to me from the Abilene district, Mr. Dale Tollett. Dale, you're in the audience? Where's Dale? Raise your hand, back in the back there. Thank you, Dale. I've been told that this procedure has been used in other areas. In Brownwood District, for example, a guy named Jim in Mills County, Jim Smith, Buddy Morgan, some others. But Dale Tollett was the fellow who took the time to photograph this and show this to me, and so I do appreciate that. And this is a edge repair done on FM 1636. There's Dale, the picture of Dale right over here to the right. And then also I saw Marvin here and Jack and Martin. I don't know if Martin's here. I hadn't seen Martin this morning. And then Brian Crawford came to one of these earlier. But there's Dale on the right. You're right. This is the road, FM 1636 in Jones County. It's not necessarily a narrow road. It's about 2 miles length. Real light structure. Y'all can relate to this. I mean, this is West Texas. Real light structure. And the problem with the road, the defect, rutting, quarter point failure, and edge damage. You can see how that's the problem. There's a picture showing some of the rutting and then some areas where the edge is gone. Let me roll this tape for you that talks about the way that, that Dale and his folks solved this problem. This is Bill Lawson on behalf of Dale Tollett, Area Maintenance Manager for Hamlin in the Abilene District. And this film shows edge repair work we did in Jones County a few years ago. As you can see, the defects here consist of rutting in that outer lane as well as quarter point failures, and then we also had a lot of edge drop-offs on this road. The pavement structure is pretty light, about 2 to 4 inches of base plus multiple seal coats, and our solution here essentially is doing a blade patch in the low area along the edge of the road on each side. We use this 10 cubic yard dump truck equipped with this homemade tailgate side discharge chute to lay a windrow of material right along the area where it's low, where we need the material. This tailgate spreader works very well. We can regulate the flow. Guy on the back rides there and can regulate the flow and puts a windrow right where we need it. The material we're using is hot mix type C for the thicker fills and type D for the thinner areas, the thinner sections. Type D will work fine for the thinner ones. Once we get the windrow put in just where we want it, we'll come behind with the maintainer as you see here and spread the material out. Maintainer operation does have an attachment on the end of the maintainer blade to keep the width of the repair uniform, keep the material right where we want it. Now you're seeing the whole operation, placing the windrow, the maintainer, blading the material out, and then coming behind, of course, a steel wheel roller where we'll roll the material to get it tight just the way it needs to be. This is a very effective approach for this kind of defect, and given the depth of ruts here, we spent probably about $14,000 or $15,000 per centerline mile on this repair. It's lasted very well. Earlier sections lasted about 4 years and just no problem at all. Of course, when we're done, we do have to pull up the edges. It's very important to do that because otherwise we'll end up with more serious edge drop-offs than we initially started with. So that's a very important follow-through thing here, which we emphasize in our area, something we have to watch out for a whole lot. We try to do this ahead of the seal coat work so that we can, once we're done, place a seal coat to tie the whole road together. There's a nice shot showing the completed edge repair section. Note that the rut and low edges are gone and we have a nice smooth road just ready to be repaired. That's it. Thank you. Okay, thank you, Dale. Let me just go through that with you briefly. Again, this is the defect, the rutting, the quarter point failures, the edge damage. The solution using this edge repair using the tailgate attachment and the side discharge chute, place material along the edge, get a windrow there, blade that out with the motor grader with the attachment on the end of the blade, roll it with the steel wheel roller, tighten it up, and then it's ready for a seal coat, ready to cover that up. Data on this section of road, that was a pretty serious drop. I mean, the damage to the edge was pretty significant, so it used quite a bit of material. The average cost about $14,000, $15,000 per centerline mile. It held up very well. This cost a lot of money, but it's a good repair for using that for that kind of application. It worked out real nicely. Dale Tollett, the area maintenance manager in Hamlin, in the back of the room. You can just ask him about that if you need more information about that. There's a phone number. And incidentally, I'll continually, as we talk about things, I'll try to give you the name, the place, and a phone number, or email address, or a website or something. I'll always try to consistently give you that kind of information you can take away from this conference so you can make further contacts as you need to. Continuing to talk about pavement edge maintenance procedures, one of the ones that, in fact, when we started the research, Tracy just stepped out, I guess, for a minute, but when we started the research, one of the things that immediately came to mind, in fact, perhaps the most prominent thing that came to mind, was this idea of reshaping or pulling shoulders. And we saw all kinds of terms for this: pulling shoulders, pulling edges, shouldering up, pulling up and kicking off. That was a Lubbock term. Lifting edges, just edge repair, different things. Those were some. The technical term in the academic literature, believe it or not, folks in academia write about this sort of thing, is reshaping the shoulder. And the reason they say reshaping is you're using the material that's already there when you're reshaping. In just a minute, I'll talk about replenishing. That's where you add material that's because you don't have material to work with. But reshaping is when you're reshaping the material that's already there. It's being done. Cont'd County on the outskirts of CV. Let me all know where that is. 120 vehicles per day. Nice blade work, shaping the ditch as well as pulling up the material next to the road. Another photograph. A lot of ditch work in that particular case. A lot of ditch work in that particular case. One of the things about it, though, is how good of a deal is that? Well, the answer is it varies. This is a photograph of a road, FM, in Wise County, 4,400 vehicles per day. 4,400 vehicles per day. That road is 21 feet wide. Okay? And they pull shoulders on that road. In fact, this was one of those kind of surprise things. The maintenance section supervisor was driving us around, and he said, yeah, let me go show you this section of road. I pulled that up. Now, I have a discrepancy in my notes. One place in my notes it says 2 weeks ago. Another place it says 2 months ago. Since I'm not trying to spin you all a yarn, I put the 2 months here, but it might have just been 2 weeks. Well, what's that stand for? The time necessary to blow out that edge after it had been pulled up. Because he said he'd just been out there with his equipment and pulled up that edge, and lo and behold, look at that. About a 6-inch, 7-inch drop-off. Notice the surface of the pavement is scored where vehicles dropped off there and it kind of scraped the bottom of them. It's a pretty serious problem, right? That's a big one. It just didn't last very well in that situation. There are certain applications where it does last well. Perhaps the longest, we tried to ask people, you know, how long is that going to last? And really the answer was it depends. It depends on a lot of things. Probably the longest answer I ever got was a year. Most people, the most common answer is probably 6 months or less. Some places, you know, they go out all the time. And the idea is it's just a lot of effort, but, you know, in some cases this is an appropriate thing to do. But in other cases, like in this case, where it blows out that bad after, you know, 2 months or 2 weeks, whichever it is not very long, that's beyond, well beyond the TXDOT level of service criteria. And so the idea of spending the effort on pavement edge maintenance using pulling shoulders may be thought of as a short-term fix. It has its application, but it certainly could be thought of as a short-term fix. And I would say that this application was not very effective. Certain portions of the state, this is not us, this is East Texas, high edges are just as much a problem as low edges. High edges trapping water on the pavement structure, causing it to soften up and causing it to break off, losing the edge, therefore losing the road. And so the area next to the road, they have to cut them down. Sometimes they have to bow mag up this area alongside of the road because the stand gets so heavy that they can't just mow it. It doesn't work. It gets too much stuff trapped in it, so they actually bow mag it and reshape it. Again, that's not West Texas, that's East Texas. Wilbarger County, on the outskirts of Electra. Vegetation. Now, this was actually a repair, and this was one of those awareness things. And this is kind of an insidious problem, insidious being difficult to identify, because everything looked good going into it, but then it just kind of went away. It kind of went south on them. And what happened was they had done an overlay on this section of divided highway, U.S. highway, and they had said they'd expect backfilling the pavement edges. And they'd even spec it with some material that was supposed to be, you know, the proper gradation so that it would support vegetation. But it turned out that the contractor who brought the material, it met the specification, but it did not have enough organic matter in it to support the growth of vegetation. It met the specification, but it was like specification just missed out on that one thing. Oh, it's got to be able to grow something. And it washed away. So they had to redo it. That's a sad thing, but sometimes that happens. Not necessarily a best practice, but one of the things we can learn is, you know, not let that happen to us. I've been talking about reshaping pavement edges. Again, this is the other term, replenishing with select borrow materials. Let's talk about replenishing for a moment. This photograph happens to be in El Paso, and they are using standard roadway maintenance equipment to replenish their pavement edges with RAP. They're using reclaimed asphalt pavement, RAP. And I'll show you a sequence about this a little later, but I'm just here pointing out that RAP is a very commonly used tool. And here's a series of showing you replenishing. This happens to have been taken in Mills County on the outskirts of Zephyr, between Zephyr and Democrat. I don't know where that is, FM 218. 280 vehicles per day. And in this case, they had this narrow FM road, and they had some edge drop-offs along the edge. And so what they would do before they would try to replenish this edge, they didn't really have anything out here they could scrape up that they thought would do them any good. So they had to bring in material. They used base material. I'll show you in just a minute. But before they placed the base material, they went along with the motor grader, and they cut a notch next to the road so they had enough room to put some material in so it would stay. That was the basic idea. They just bladed that out, cleaned it up a little bit. There they used a side discharge spreader, base material, lay that material right there along the edge, and then they would roll it with the motor grader blade and with the trucks that came in, anything else that came along in their convoy, their construction convoy. They'd roll it, shape it with the motor grader, and they'd be done. Now this is switching to a different road, but this illustrates something that this happens to be in the Austin district. This was a section where they did kind of a similar thing on a bigger scale, and then they put a little strip seal along the outer edge. See, they basically had a road, a shoulder from here this way. Well, they went along that shoulder and they replenished the edge with base material from here to here, and the 2-foot strip, they seal coated that because they knew that was going to be the area that got the most abuse from traffic. So that's kind of an idealized approach to replenishing what I've tried to illustrate for you there. It doesn't always happen that way. I do want to talk with you briefly about edge maintenance materials, the kind of materials that are used. Wrap, I've already mentioned this, it gets commonly used. I saw different takes on this. Some places in the state, they've got more wrap than they can deal with. They've got mountains of wrap. They just the highest point of ground in Corpus Christi is their pile of wrap. The Corpus Christi district, I'll tell you, that's right. The highest point of ground in Corpus Christi. And this happens to be a photograph of in Hood County, where they're using wrap along the pavement edge to replenish. And the idea being to get, you can see grass is trying to grow here. Their idea was to get grass to grow up in the wrap, basically using it like some sort of a soil, and get grass to grow there to stabilize, to keep the wrap in place, to deal with pavement edge drop-offs in that area. We saw lots of different kinds of wrap materials used. This is a photograph of a really nice stockpile of untreated wrap. Happens to be in Jasper County. And notice it's very uniform. Nice gradation, very uniform gradation. It wasn't always this way. A lot of places we saw the wrap, there would be just large chunks of wrap, big as a hard hat or bigger. It would be contaminated. It'd be contaminated with different kinds of things. So the quality of the wrap varied considerably. This happens to be one of the better stockpiles we saw. This is photographed from the El Paso district. Believe it or not, ladies and gentlemen, this is wrap. It's been rejuvenated with magnesium chloride, same stuff you use for de-icing. They dose the wrap with magnesium chloride, they blade it out like this and roll it, and I thought I was standing on hot mix. I could not tell the difference. And so once we discovered that, but there are lots of things that people use to rejuvenate wrap and mess with it. By far the most common thing is nothing. They just spread it out and do something with it. But then we saw people add water to it, moisture condition it just like Flex Base, and that worked real well. That was probably the next most common after nothing. Sometimes folks would use emulsions, asphalt. Sometimes they would add cement to it. Some people tried sand, this magnesium chloride here. Sometimes they'd blend it with Flex Base or blend it with just native sandy material soil. This magnesium chloride thing was kind of interesting, and so RMC1 is actually writing a research project statement to explore the use of this to see if this could be effective for other applications, or maybe it was just more the wrap than it was the magnesium chloride, and they're going to look into it because the city of El Paso does it, New Mexico does it, TXDOT's doing it in El Paso, and it's working for them. Of course, it's hot out there, and there are a lot of reasons why that may be worked, and those factors need to be looked into, so maybe more will come down the pike on that. Later on, some of the materials engineers, experts like Dr. Hossein, who helped me with this, Dr. Sinadira here, maybe some of those folks will get a chance to work on that particular project. One of the fun things about doing this project, in doing the literature reviews, you find that a lot of good stuff exists out there that sometimes we've forgotten about. And when you start talking about using wrap, because this has been so prominently used in the Department of Transportation across the entire state, including West Texas, you might ask yourself, well, How do I know what's the best thing? If I want to add something to it, if I want to do something with it, how do I know what's the best thing to do? Well, it turns out that there are a couple of publications showing here, both of them out of TTI, as the other guys wearing the maroon hats. Guidelines on the use of RAP in routine maintenance activities. They did a study about which kinds of additives do the best job and achieve the best performance for RAP for various applications, and they wrote a little study, and you probably have one of these in your district office. You may have one in your maintenance section, but you can get one of these. You can call these folks on the phone, and I've given you a handout where you can read this a little bit and get the reference, and you can look at it. I'll just pass it around so you can have a look at it. But the idea is, why reinvent the wheel? Take a look and see what other people have done, and you can benefit from that. This other one, routine maintenance uses for milled reclaimed asphalt pavement, just talking about different things that are used, the different quality of RAP, the amount of RAP, how it's stockpiled, how it's accounted for, different kinds of things like that. Also, another very interesting study. You can get one of those. Let me pass it around. I'll start with Dr. Sinadira. No need to regen it. Just use what you've already got. That makes a lot of sense. Again, I gave you a handout so you can see the title on those, and you can purchase those or get a copy of those if you find that something you'd be interested in. Speaking of continuing to talk about materials used for pavement edge maintenance, of course, flex base was often cited, often used. Different kinds of asphaltic materials were used. This happens to be in Hidalgo County, down in the valley, down there in the FAR district. They were using limestone, rock, aggregate, asphalt, LRA, different kinds of asphalt materials, all different hot mix coal mix, all different kinds of things. Asphalt materials were used for, I think, perhaps the most common material that was used in the state. Get the answer to this. It's what you have. If you have RAP, you use RAP. If you've got flex base, you use flex base. If you don't have those and you've got to pay for something, well, you know, you start going into your stockpile and using what you have. That's the idea. And after that, probably just in terms of volume, RAP showed up more commonly than any of the others. But the idea was, y'all are very creative, very innovative in the way you use this material, these different materials. And what I'm presenting to you is that we saw applications where all of these things would work very well. And the more expensive materials were usually used for the more focused applications. The material that didn't cost a whole lot, people were a little more generous with it. Okay, that's the end of session 3. Let's go through the true-false quiz, and we're doing real well. Okay, I have it in my hand. True or false, pavement edge maintenance expenditures mostly consist of work performed under Function Code 245, edge repair, and totaled $11.4 million in fiscal year 2001. Is that true or false? Well, the answer is false. It's true that your expenditures for Function Code 270 was $11.4 million. That should have been so that's an error right there. 245 is widening the road. 270 would have been $11.4 million. But also what we talked about was that you do a whole lot more than just Function Code 270 or 245 or all those others. It's probably closer to 30 or 40 million than 11 million, maybe even 50 million. Y'all spend a lot of money and do a lot of different things on pavement edge repair. Question 2. Which of the following is not a best practice for pavement edge maintenance awareness? Awareness being the key term here. A, get maintenance input during the design phase of rehab projects. B, attending the risk management to reduce tort liability course, since your daily work involves assessment of risk. C, provide leadership at both the division level and at the district level, since the appropriate emphasis must occur at the highest levels. Or D, all of the above. Well, it's all of the above. All of those are best practices for edge maintenance awareness. Again, keeping mindset, having a mindset of dealing with the problem. Question 3, which of the following preventive maintenance practices apply Tracy's Law? A, fog seal, edge seal, strip seal. Remember Tracy's Law? Remember that? What was that one? You lose the edge, you lose the road. Yeah. B, intersection approach apron. C, vegetation control. D, delineation. E, all of the above. Another one of the all of the above, exactly. All of those deal with Tracy's Law. All of those go toward protecting the pavement edge. That's a good thing. Question 4, true or false, pulling shoulders is one of the more long-term permanent solutions to pavement edge repair. False. It has its application, but as I demonstrated in my little picture of the blowout for 2 weeks or 2 months, it's not really a long-term deal. It may be adequate for certain applications, certain low-volume sections of roadway, but there are other ways to do it. If you're looking for a long-term solution, that's not it. Question 5, which repair material is most commonly used for replenishing low edges? A, untreated reclaimed asphalt pavement, RAP. B, treated RAP. C, flex base. Or D, asphaltic materials. Which is most common? Well, the correct answer to this question, really, again, as I said, it's what you have, right? In your own section, that'd be the answer, is what you have. And the one that we saw most common across the state was A, untreated RAP, untreated. You want to use treated RAP, look in one of those booklets I'm handing around, one of those references, they'll tell you how to do that right, and you get the benefit of other people. Okay? Thank you, that's great. As we talk about road widening, I guess I'd mention to you that to me this was one of the surprise findings of our research, quite frankly. When we began the research, I was thinking about the things really I just got through talking about, different types of edge maintenance practices and procedures, that sort of thing, and road widening really didn't enter my mind. But as we traveled around the state and started talking to people, this became a very prominent feature in the types of best practices for pavement edge maintenance that you all are involved with. And so let's talk about it. The basis for looking at road widening as a best practice for pavement edge maintenance, well, just recall that pulling shoulders, that's kind of a common thing that people think about. That's not a long-term fix. A lot of effort, repeated effort, with not a lot of long-term benefit that comes out of it. There may be other ways. Alternative repair scenarios are appropriate to consider. When we started talking about road widening, and as we traveled across the state, we saw this appear in discussions throughout the state. Some people really believed in it. Some people had real concerns about it. I've become convinced that it's a valid method for dealing with pavement edge maintenance. Now, of course, there are some obstacles to overcome. And so one of the ways that I present this topic is to try to address all those obstacles. In other words, we ask people, why would, if people would say, well, I don't think you ought to do that. And I'll say, why do you think that? And I'd take notes. And I'd ask them, and I'd really want to understand. And so every time someone said something like that, one way or the other, I would pay attention and I would try to write that down and understand that and follow it out. And so the summary of my effort in trying to understand this idea of road widening as a best practice for pavement edge maintenance deals with these factors. First, what I want to do is suggest to you that road widening is the ultimate solution for pavement edge maintenance. And I want to show you that it's totally consistent with maintenance division policy, that there are design issues and concerns, but those can be and are overcome, that there are different ways to do it. Some work needs to be done by contract, some can be done, some must be rehabilitation, some can be just simply widening, and there has to be a decision made, a considered decision about which way to go on that. And also there's an appropriate place for widening using in-house forces. And I want to talk with you about all of those factors. The logical basis for road widening as the ultimate solution for edge repair derives directly from observation of the narrow roads. And this is in combination with the adverse or abusive traffic and the environmental factors as being the primary issues that cause pavement edge drop-offs. Widening puts a considerable dent in those. It deals with much of the problem that causes edge drop-offs. If you have a wider road, you're better off. Those were the factors. Let's talk about that for a minute. I'll begin nationally. In addition to doing the literature review, or as part of the nationwide literature review, worldwide really literature review, looking on the internet, things like that, I called maintenance directors in a sampling of states. Let's look at some national examples. I'll cite just a few of those. In New York, I spoke with Edward Dennehy, who's the pavement and bridge preventive maintenance engineer. And his fellow, this is in New York, right? He said their roads have at least a 2-foot shoulder. Unless they don't get into off-shoulder maintenance, it's not an issue in New York. Notice it says their roads have shoulders. So it's not an issue. He said, you need to talk to Pennsylvania. So I talked to Pennsylvania, and I spoke with Don Wise, the chief of the PennDOT Maintenance Division. And he said their road system includes dirt roads to interstates, and he said they instituted a formal plan 2 to 3 years ago to widen their narrow roads as a function of budget and manpower. So this is something they said, we're going to widen these things, we're going to start ramping up, we're going to deal with the problem this way. There's a formal process in the state of Pennsylvania to achieve this objective. Georgia is a little further along in this process than any other state I spoke with. I called Buddy Gratton, who's the state maintenance engineer. Remember, these are all the people the equivalent of Zane Webb. Buddy Gratton in Georgia. And he said they instituted a program some 20 years ago to add 2-foot shoulders on all their roads. This is how they did it. 3 to 4% a year, phase by phase, and the way they selected their phase was a combination of width, speed, and traffic. He said now they are basically done. They started 20 years ago. They're basically done with all their roads in that state now, widening them like this. And he is a happy man. The only thing, I said, well, what do you think about this? That was a lot of effort, a lot of time, a lot of money. Was it worth it? Would you do anything different if you had to do it over again? And he said, yeah, I would. He said, instead of putting a 2-foot shoulder, I ought to put a 4-foot shoulder. That's the only thing he said he'd do differently. He said, it's the way to go. Not only is this a situation that exists in the states, but right here in TXDOT, there are a lot of examples, a number of examples. Let me talk about Odessa for a minute. Remember Odessa? They were one of the top 3 in edges, one of the top 3 of the state overall in their pavements, in the Tex map rankings. When I went to Odessa and asked them, what's your typical width of a road here in Odessa? 32 feet, FM road. 12-foot travel lanes, 4-foot shoulders. 32 feet. That's kind of different, right? They added shoulders to their roads. Notice they don't have an edge maintenance problem. They can count on this many fingers the number of road sections in their district that don't have shoulders, and most of those are access roads to like interstate highway. It's just not an issue there because they've got wider roads. Also Houston. Now, I realize Houston is a unique case. It's a unique situation. Very high traffic. When I went down to talk with them about pavement edge maintenance, and I was expecting them to talk about pulling shoulders and doing this or doing that, what they started doing was pulling plan after plan after plan off the shelf, showing where they've widened systematically just about all the roads in their district. And he said the reason they do that is because they can't have people out there pulling shoulders doing stuff. They have too much rainfall, and they have too much traffic, so if they have a narrow road, they're going to get somebody killed trying to work on a road like that. That's just not good maintenance practice. So they've had to invest the money, and there's no easy problem to solve down there because it takes a lot of money. And of course, they spend a lot of money. They got a lot of traffic though, and they've, when you start talking to them about this, they started giving me plans showing, these are the road widening sections that we've done. And these folks are not alone. I've talked with folks throughout the state. Let me continue to talk about this. So what I'm suggesting to you is that roads with shoulders are the way things ought to be, and are you convinced? Now, maybe some of you are, maybe some of you are not, but let's keep talking about it. One of the first questions that people who didn't really think this was something that y'all should be doing said, this is not really a TXDOT, the maintenance division doesn't really want us doing this. That's not maintenance. We shouldn't be doing that. Policy. And so I looked into that very carefully, and I want to talk with you about TXDOT maintenance division policy regarding widening roads. I went to Austin, had a meeting with Joe Graff, Ken Bamey, a couple other folks I guess dropped in. Those are the people I spoke with. Y'all ever ask Joe Graff a question? He doesn't give you an answer to the question. Y'all notice that? He doesn't. What Joe does when you ask him a question is he reaches over and he goes, well, let's see. And he pulls out the maintenance manual. And he goes, here. And he opens up the maintenance manual and he goes, let's see what it says. He won't answer my question. I said, what do you have to say about it? He says, well, let's see what it says. And he just points the manual. And so I commit that this is what Joe did to me, so I'm doing it for you. And I gave you here, notice what your maintenance manual has to say. First of all, Section 2, definitions of maintenance work in your maintenance manual. Routine, preventive, and major maintenance. Travel way, pavement widening to achieve a maximum travel way width of 26 feet can be considered maintenance if done to correct a maintenance problem. You can do it. Shoulder, adding shoulders if done to correct a maintenance problem, and edge repair edge drop-offs are a maintenance problem for a maximum width of 4 foot total for both sides can be considered major maintenance. It's in your manual. I even included a copy. I know y'all have this, but I included a copy in your book of the section from your maintenance manual that talks about this. It is allowed. It is encouraged. It's something that is expected that you would view as a tool, something you could do if you wanted to from a policy perspective, your division's going to back you on this. The upshot of the conversation with Joe, and I took pages and pages of notes. Mr. Leverton back in the back who's helping with this, he was there with me when I did this meeting, is that first of all, districts should do this type of work. And there is a function code for it, function code 245, road widening. Also, the maintenance manual, according to Joe Graff, is written with flexibility to allow you the freedom to do what needs to be done. You all know what your priorities are. You're the ones that have more knowledge about your road conditions than anybody else in the state, in your section. You know about that, so y'all could make this, and just view this as an opportunity. Joe's a strong proponent of preventive maintenance, viewing this as a preventive deal, not putting good money after bad, that kind of a thing. Just it's a preventive thing. And then the only thing that he said, the only hint of a be careful, or, you know, this is what I'd look for, is that road widening jobs should not be turned into what ought to be construction projects. And there is a difference. And so one of the things we're going to talk about is how you know the difference between those two. And let's talk about that. Design issues.